Welcome to our June 1st, 2023 meeting. Dahlia Palchik, Chair of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. I'd like to note that we are starting the meeting at 7:03 p.m. We are live streaming the meeting on MVTC's YouTube channel. We have the following commissioners participating electronically. Jennifer DeBrule is participating virtually from Richmond under the provision of living over 60 miles from our meeting location. Senator Bell is participating virtually as he's out of the country on business travel. Matt Letourneau will be joining us virtually from Loudoun County for the WMATA board report portion of the meeting due to a personal reason. And Takis Karen Tonis, thank you. I had it a minute ago. Our new commissioner from Arlington is participating virtually from out of state on business travel. And also James Walkinshaw is participating virtually from Fairfax County due to a medical reason. Just a reminder, as is our normal practice, after commissioners vote on actions in the room, I will ask a roll call vote from our virtual participants so we ensure we hear all the votes. Our commission secretary has already confirmed we have quorum. If you want to give a brief memo.
So regarding the parking, I know some of you had problems getting in. The arm is up. We've confirmed that the arm will stay up to be able to get out, and Scott has agreed to go down before the meeting's over just to double check to make sure everything's good. So you will be able to get out. Don't worry.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I know we'll be anxious to get home when we're done. This month's commission meeting agenda is chock full of important MVTC efforts, so I trust that you have all reviewed the agenda. Before we dive in, I'd like to recognize a couple of special guests who are with us tonight, representing the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. Board member Jay Pizzette. Is he here? Not yet. Okay, so board member Jay Pizzette is expected. He's also a former MVTC commissioner and Arlington County board member. And DJ Stadler is here, EPRA's executive director. Very good to see you. We will hear more from him later in the agenda. And we also want to welcome virtually a new board member from Arlington who will be sworn in later this evening. Takis.
Good evening. Oh, yeah. Karen Tonis.
You're just Takis to me. I'm sorry, Karen Tonis.
It's fine with me, Madam Chair.
To start things off, Kate, do we have any public comments this month?
We did not receive any public comments.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And now it's Emily. I think it's getting us ready for action item 2A. This is a very special moment, bittersweet, to approve a resolution of commendation for the Honorable Katie Crystal on her departure from MVTC. Tonight, we are saying goodbye to one of our commissioners who has served on MVTC for over 6 years. Wow, time flies. We really want to congratulate Katie Crystal on being selected to serve as the Chief Executive Officer of the Tysons Community Alliance. So many of us will get to continue working with her, and I know she'll be very focused on transportation transit in our region. The Tysons Community Alliance is a new nonprofit public-private partnership promoting equitable economic growth and community development in the Tysons area. So I know especially Supervisor Alcorn and I and Supervisor Faust and Chairman McKay are very thrilled that we'll get to continue to work with her in that capacity. But unfortunately, and before that, it didn't mean that she'd be leaving. She'd be leaving a little bit early from Arlington County Board. The good news is that MVTC looks forward to that continued work with Katie in her new role to promote transit initiatives across the region. Last week, Katie was also honored at the Virginia Transit Association's annual conference. There's a nice little slideshow of Katie, where she received VTA's outstanding contribution by an individual award. Definitely very well-deserved award for Ms. Crystal. She has been a tireless advocate for Arlington County, MVTC, and the VRE Operations Board. And MVTC was proud to join VRE and MVTA in nominating her for this honor. So we're very thrilled to be able to honor you here as well tonight. We have prepared a resolution for commendation for Katie. I won't read the entire resolution, but I think you all know that Katie has been an advocate of long-term sustainable funding for transit, truly multimodal transportation network, economic growth and development, improved transit service, regional collaboration, zero and reduced fare initiatives, and especially in transportation equity. So to that, could I have a motion to approve the recommendation of commendation for Ms. Crystal? Multiply moved, second? Multiply seconded. Any further discussion? Yes.
I won't slow us down much. I did just want to offer three thoughts. First, June 2020, after George Floyd's murder, sorry to be that direct, but you opened the meeting with an extraordinary invitation of the role that transportation had played in improving our American story. And it was exactly the right tone to set. And so I want to thank you for that. The balance between focusing on the big issues in meetings, the critical details, as well as flexibility when discussions kind of got a life of their own, has been a hallmark of excellent leadership. We will not begrudge our Fairfax colleagues. We will just, in addition to excellence on the Arlington County Board, thank you for your excellence in this body.
And I just want to add to that in the regionalism, I'm thrilled that we are working on projects like BRT Route 7, which the northern section begins in Tyson's and heads through many of our jurisdictions. So definitely there will be continued opportunity for Katie to continue her work in that regional transportation effort in partnership with MBTC. So I think we're all thrilled with that. All right, I do need to do the roll call. Oh, let me, now the roll call vote for those participating electronically, I will do that first. Mr. Bell. Mr. Bell, we cannot hear you. No, okay. Mr. Carantonis, Takis?
I am present.
Perfect. And you vote aye in favor of Ms.
Aye.
Crystal.
Yes,
Thank you.
I thought I wasn't allowed, so yes. Aye.
Well, I was gonna say, but because officially this morning, we will do,
I didn't hear it. Let me just.
and I don't know if we have Mr. Walkinshaw.
Yes,
Aye.
Perfect, excellent. And I don't believe we have Mr. Letourneau.
I'm here. I'm here.
Great, Matt, Mr.
I
Letourneau.
wouldn't miss this vote, okay? This is a big, it's a close call, but I'm a yes for my friend. Who I really miss.
All right, perfect. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Wonderful. Well, with that, we're very thrilled to be honoring Katie. I have the official language and the award. If you could join me up front for a quick photo.
Thank you. Well,
Yes.
I would love to say thank you.
Yes.
And I know how hard it is to keep one of these meetings on track, so I will not prevent the chair from doing that work, but this is deeply meaningful for me. This work has been some of the most meaningful of my time on the Arlington County Board. You all have been extraordinary colleagues, and I will say just in parting, I have been sorting through now 8 years of notes as I try to go through my documents back in the board office and figure out what needs to be retained for FOIA, et cetera. But one of the most impactful things I came across in my notes were the notes from that meeting in, I believe, 2018, shortly after the General Assembly had agreed to fund its share of the capital needs for WMATA, but at a pretty significant cost to governance. And it was a moment for us, I think, in the region to realize more than ever that it was, to paraphrase the rally cry from the colonial era, right? Join or die. After so many years of us being able to advance our own interests as jurisdictions on the WMATA board, we were truly having to wrap our minds around the idea of speaking with one voice. And there were a lot of mechanics and operationalizing what that would look like. But above all, it required us to place our trust in one another. I think that trust has been well-founded, and certainly it has paid dividends. And I know as we face more existential challenges for WMATA, but also incredible opportunities across jurisdictional like Envision Route 7 and many others, it will once again require us to keep that faith in one another. So thanks for letting me be part of this coalition for this last leg of the ride, and I can't wait to see where it goes next. Thank you.
Hold back some tears here, Katie. And really grateful and all for your leadership, and for those of you who are on that board and brought us Kate, thank you as well, because we've had excellent leadership. All right, and so we've all seen the beautiful slideshow. Next up, I have to go back up there for the oath of offices for a new commissioner, Takis, who is taking over from Ms. Crystal. Karen Tonis. Takis is just more fun. Takis, welcome to the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. And I see that you're up there ready to join me for the oath of office. Let me take the.
You can use mine.
Oh, I got it. Perfect. All right, so I think I stand here. Okay. I was in your position not long ago, so it's good to see you. All right, so yes,
I
Takis,
think I can hear you a little bit better now, so.
you
for-
can. Oh, good. Let me know if you- Okay, you can hear okay? So
Yes,
if you want to repeat after me, I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Commonwealth of Virginia,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Commonwealth of Virginia,
and that I will faithfully discharge all the duties incumbent upon me
and I will faithfully discharge all the duties incumbent upon me
as a member of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission,
as a member of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission,
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Excellent. Well, welcome so much,
Thank
Takis.
you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And if I may say a word, because I didn't get to hear, to be able to communicate that, I have pretty important shoes to fill here at this commission. Katie, I cannot possibly overstate, how important your contributions have been to Arlington and to this commission. And all of us who have been, following that closely, they know exactly what, I learned a lesson from you on what transportation obviously connects, right? But in your case, you managed to demonstrate that transportation connects policy with opportunity, and that was a great achievement. I do believe that if you do for Tysons what you've done for Arlington, then this region is in absolutely excellent shape. Thank you.
We are thrilled to have you. I know there's some big shoes to fill, but we know you are up to the task. So very excited to have our full commission again. We will now move on to action item 3, approving May 4th, 2023 minutes. Can I please have a motion to approve the minutes of May 4th? Mr. Scott, Commissioner Stiles has moved. Could I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. DeFerranti. Oh, goodness. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Are there any abstentions?
Madam Chair, I wasn't there, so I have to abstain.
Excellent. And
Actually, I will have to abstain as well. My apologies.
you don't have,
Because I was not.
oh, you were not here.
So you may need
A
new
different second? Okay. Would someone else like to second? All right, Mr. Aguirre. Now let's do a roll call vote for those participating electronically. Mr. Bell, are you with us? No. Okay, Mr. Karen Thomas.
The abstain.
Oh, abstain, sorry. And Mr. Walkinshaw.
Hi.
And is Mr. Turner still with us?
Yeah, I'm an aye.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, the motion passes. We are now on to action item number 4, approving the consent agenda. Tonight, we have 2 actions on the consent agenda. And if you can speak to these, please.
Just very quickly, the 2 items that we have, one of them is to authorize me to execute an extension to our state legislative liaison services contract. And the second one is, was of course, perfect segue following the appointment of Mr. Karatonis, is to appoint him as a principal member of the VRE Operations Board.
You. Could I have well, are there any questions before I do that? Okay, could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Mr. McKay, a second. Second, Ms. Bagley. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? And I'll do a roll call vote. I know it's a little bit different. Mr. Karantonis,
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw,
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau.
Aye.
Okay, all right. The motion passes. Action item number 5 is our commuter choice program. We did have an extensive presentation at our May meeting regarding the staff recommended and joint commission working group endorsed commuter choice I-395-95 program of projects for fiscal years 24 and 25. Commuter choice senior manager Ben Owen is back this month to present 2 action items for commuter choice. Included in your materials at your place at the table is a list of the proposed projects for funding. And Ben, if you could please speak to them, please.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Tonight, we do seek the Commission's adoption of the recommended I-395-95 commuter choice fiscal year 2024-25 program and projects and referral of it to the Commonwealth Transportation Board for final action later this month. PRTC is taking up a matching complementary resolution this evening. You do have a list of the included projects among your handouts, through item 5A here. It is the same program in which we briefed you last month, in which the Joint Commission Working Group had endorsed in April. Since we met last month, we wrapped up a very successful public comment period. We received 646 submissions. That's more than 5 times as many as in any prior round in either corridor. And your meeting materials for tonight include a link to the 100 pages of comments we received. Overall, they are very supportive of the projects being recommended for funding. A few I'd point out in particular, there were many comments in support of Dash's 3 proposals from their riders. And if you are ever in doubt about the value of frequent accessible public transportation to residents of our region, I would heartily encourage you to read those comments. We also received a number of comments on Fairfax County's Richmond Highway Bus Rapid Transit Project that was prominently featured in a WJLA local news segment, which also featured Kate, that aired on May 9th, about the funding candidates and the comment period. A bit more mixed input here, but still net positive towards the project. The news segment on its own fueled a late surge in our comment submissions. Almost half of what we received came in the last week of the month-long comment period. So lesson learned, we hope to make the local news again in future funding rounds because that really helped drive input and engagement. A very quick recap of what's in the program: $48 million for 13 projects that would support an estimated 11,000 additional weekday trips in the I-395-95 corridor, while reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 3/4 and saving commuters $4 million per year in fuel expenses relative to drive alone travel. The programming action would also commit to funding the remaining $18 million requested for 2 larger capital projects off the top in the next program of projects, which will be fiscal years 26 and 27. That concludes my remarks. Happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. I will just start with a comment. Excellent feedback that you got on this. Really appreciate it. Want to thank your outreach communications team who did an incredible job and 5 times the comment period. That's amazing, and I really appreciate that. You got a lot of submissions, and that we were able to figure out with so many requests how to separate funding over the years and try to fund as many of those projects as possible.
Yeah.
So very excited about this. I'm excited about BRT on Route 1, and I don't have any further questions. Yes,
Chairman, I
Mr. McKay.
move approval of resolution 2499.
Absolutely. Do we have a second? All right, by Ms. Garvey. Any comments? Why don't I start with the online, if that's okay? Okay, let me see. Do I have Mr. Caratonis?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This is a fantastic lineup. I have to say that I live on one of these corridors, the very first one, the one served for Metrobus 16M, 41,000 potential riders, 17,000 real riders are, have been awaiting this decision. It's extremely critical to make this service available through frequency and level of service here. And this is a significant upgrade from what we have today. And I look really forward with enthusiasm to see it implemented. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And so I believe that's I vote yes.
Yes.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Madam Chair, you break a little bit. I will try to improve the audio. Sorry. Aye.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau.
Aye.
Excellent. And so now all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Excellent. So to that, we have that motion passes. Thank you very much. Excellent work. We're very excited for those projects.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Next up, we have action item 5B, resolution number 2500, authorizing the executive director to execute the commuter choice Arlington Transportation Demand Management Standard Project Agreement changes. That's a mouthful. The next action is to approve resolution. Ben, if you could please provide some context for us regarding the action being requested.
Absolutely. So for the second action, Arlington County and we seek to modify the scope of an existing I-66 commuter choice project. This was awarded back in June 2019 for transportation demand management activities. We are bringing the scope change to you for consideration because it is substantive in nature. Basically, it would direct the remaining funding on this project, $566,000 out of the original $1.35 million award, away from education and outreach to corridor commuters on their travel options and towards a short-term peak period free fare campaign on ART bus routes operating along or into the I-66 corridor. The shift would better reflect post-pandemic opportunities and needs for the funding, namely helping ART rebuild its ridership, which remains down somewhat and with more readily measurable outcomes. We reviewed the proposed amended scope with our Commonwealth partners for their concurrence that would benefit toll payers in the corridor and thus continue to meet the eligibility parameters of the program. The Arlington County Board approved the scope change at their May 13th meeting. So very quick summary of the action here. I will note before I wrap up too that you have two other written program updates on your meeting materials. No cost contract extension we've executed for technical support for the program. And then just a bit of a heads up on gearing up for our next call for projects this fall on the I-66 corridor.
Excellent. Really appreciate that, especially those of us who are not on the Arlington board. I don't know if you all want to add anything to that, or that was a good summary.
I think it's great. I hope everybody approves it.
Wonderful. So let me go ahead and ask if there is a motion. In favor.
Move in favor.
Approval, second, Arlington's all in favor. Let me do further discussion first before I do the roll call. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none, let me start with online. Mr. Carantonis.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau.
Aye.
Excellent. Now, all those in favor, please say aye. Any abstentions? Any opposed? Perfect. The motion passes. Thank you very much. Excellent work. Thank you so much, Ben. I did want to mention, Mr. Fizzett, I believe has joined us now. Jay Fizzett, we did announce you at the beginning. Happy to see you here with us today. I know we'll be hearing from your executive director, and thank you for being our partner on the BRA board. All right, now back to number 6. The Legislative and Policy Committee met on May 17th, and we have Legislative and Policy Committee Chair Kenneth Aguirre to give an overview of the meetings and our Executive Director, Kate Mattice, to introduce the action item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as was mentioned, our Legislative and Policy Committee met on May 17th, where we had our legislative liaison, Ms. Amy Perrone-Cyber, who briefed us on the committee about upcoming primary elections and the changing composition of the Northern Virginia delegation at the General Assembly. We all are well aware that we're looking at the primaries and what's going to happen in November, see where things will fall and who will be needing to go advocate with down in Richmond. But it's going to be a key component of educating our incoming lawmakers on METC's transit priorities, policies, and history. This will be a key focus moving into the next session. The committee was also briefed on the updated value of transit study, which we'll hear more about shortly, and the Metro operating funding and reform working group. The committee looks forward to working closely with the WMATA committee and championing the findings of the value of transit study as we move into developing our legislative agenda for next year. Now I will turn this over to Ms. Mattice.
Thank you, Mr. Getty. So in a few minutes, I'm going to turn it over to our Senior Program Manager, Anne McGrain, who's going to present the key findings from the value of Northern Virginia transit to the Commonwealth study. I just wanted to provide a few introductory remarks on it. If you recall, we actually did do some work on this about 5 years ago. So we're really excited to be able to come back, revisit, do a little bit of modifications to the scope. And so, but I think we all recognize that the study really ties into a larger conversation that really the commission and the entire DC metro area is looking at about finding long-term sustainable operating funding for Metro. And so the WMATA and the Legislative and Policy Committees have heard over the past couple months, we've kicked off a staff level technical working group It's going to really examine potential revenue sources that could be in consideration in Virginia. And so working group efforts are going to feed into a larger regional conversation that's going to inform our legislative agenda heading into the fall. So the presentation you're about to hear documents the justification for our ongoing and increased investment in our transit network, and shows how our transit network benefits every resident in the entire Commonwealth of Virginia. The full technical report, including the methodology and findings, is already up on our website, novatransit.org/value of transit. You can also scan the QR code on the handout. Yes, see, I should have done this, right? On the handout, that's right here. We just did a quick little summary. QR code at the bottom will take you directly to that website. So Anne, please go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Next slide, please. So I think, a number of you have seen this presentation in slightly different iterations, but I'll just go from the top, and that is Northern Virginia is shaped by its transit network, and how we've grown and where firms have located over the years is really influenced by the presence of high quality transit. And I think that's something everyone in this room knows, and a lot of people who live in this region know. But really the goal of this study is to quantify that value of transit in terms of personal income and sales tax revenue that is sent to the Commonwealth, so that there's a more tangible metric that really demonstrates transit's value, especially to those who live outside the region or just live in areas that aren't as dependent on transit for their success and economic growth. Next slide, please. So we'll get straight to the chase. What did we find? Northern Virginia Transit, and by this we mean local and regional buses, Metro Rail, VRE, generates $1.5 billion in personal income and sales tax revenue to the Commonwealth each year. So this is money that flows to Richmond to be used for programs and services that benefit all Virginians. We've been asked in previous committee meetings, how much of this do we think can be attributed to Metro Rail? We estimate that it's at least 1 billion just due to how critical it is as kind of the backbone of the system. And I also just want to point out kind of 3 notable differences to our 2018 report that Kate mentioned earlier. And that is that now in this report, we're looking at local and regional buses. Our previous version only assessed Metro Rail and VRE. And the reason we did this is really because it's a network and people are connecting to Metro Rail or VRE by bus. It's a whole system and people are using different modes. Our analysis year is also 2025. And we did this for 2 reasons. One being that we're a little further from some of the impacts of COVID in that regard. And so it's those direct effects are maybe less impactful. And then it also, comparing it to 2018, what it does is we have years of additional growth. And then finally, and you can see this in the graph that's on the chart, you'll notice that the $1.5 billion number combines what are known as direct impacts and indirect and induced impacts. And I'll describe this more later in the presentation, but really the main point is that, there's kind of a domino effect of job loss that happens, and it's not always just exactly where Metro Rail is. And so we consider this to be a more robust accounting of what the value of transit is, both to our region and to the Commonwealth. Next slide, please. So to take a step back, the way we got to that $1.5 billion number is we used travel modeling to compare a status quo scenario of 2025 to a 2025 scenario where no transit existed in Northern Virginia. And so then you can look at the difference in the number of vehicle trips that would happen, how many miles traveled would increase, what the congestion change would be, and that's how you begin to understand transit's impact. And so without transit, of course, we'd see more people having to shift to cars, and there would be about a 278,000 increase, vehicle increase, or 278,000 increase in new trips. That's a 5% increase in vehicle trips a day. On top of that, it's 1.8 million more miles traveled by car, which is about a 6% increase, and then 209,000 additional hours of vehicle delay or congestion. And that's actually a 64% increase over the kind of status quo in 2025. I say those numbers, but they're kind of incomprehensibly large. And so that's part of the reason why we have this graphic on the right. If you line the cars up to represent each new trip of those 278,000 trips, that line would stretch from New York City to Chicago. Also, I think it's really key to think about that percent increase in delay being so much greater than the increase in miles traveled. And what this means is that everyone's typical trips are taking longer. The number of destinations you can reach within a set period of time are diminishing. Your radius of travel and like what your world is that you're traveling in just begins to get smaller. And so I think that's a really key thing to remember. Next slide. These two maps are just showing the percent increase in vehicle trips during a morning peak period on a typical weekday. The darkest green areas are where the percent increase is largest. So origins are the trip starts, destinations, the trip ends. And since this is the morning, it's a typical work commute trip. And so without transit, what you see is that drivers are basically concentrating in the areas that transit previously served. So you can almost, I think in the destinations in particular, you can like pinpoint where metro stations are. And that's because that's where people are now having to drive. And I think we all also know that really this means that people are driving to places that are already congested, and they're also our key office and retail areas. So this is kind of the concerning scenario that occurs when transit doesn't exist. Next slide. Take it a step further and look at the impacts to the bridges, or really all of the crossings of the Potomac River. So without Metro Rail, VRE, and regional buses crossing the Potomac River, it becomes even more of a barrier than it is now. And so there are 155,000 additional vehicles that cross the Potomac River each day in this no transit scenario. And that's what this map on the left is showing. Basically, each one of those little car icons is 5,000 vehicles. The gray is the base scenario of 2025. And then the red cars are those increases in vehicles. And then we have the actual number of vehicles that each bridge would be expected to have to take, and then also the percent increase for that bridge. So again, it's kind of a lot of numbers. They're big, kind of hard to really have a good idea. And so that's where comparisons are helpful. So for those of you who maybe are familiar with the Hampton Roads area or went to last week's VTA conference and went in one of those bridge tunnels, the increase in traffic volume, that 155,000 additional vehicles a day, is the daily traffic that happens on the two bridge tunnels, I-64 and I-664 in a day. So that's a lot. Also, it's the population of Roanoke and Harrisonburg combined. Just other ways to think of some of these numbers. And then maybe things that speak to us here is that in that peak period when congestion is at its worst, in a 2025 base scenario for modeling, often a lot of our bridges are already kind of beyond capacity, but it gets even worse without transit, such that if you tried to build your way out of the scenario, which question whether that actually would work, but like if you tried, you'd need 2 additional lanes on Memorial, Roosevelt, and Wilson bridges, and then the 14th Street Bridge would need 3 additional lanes. And again, you're still landing into the street grid of DC, so how it would process that would be an open question. Next slide, please. So with this understanding of the impact that having no transit has on travel in the region, the next step in our process was that we basically remove employment and households from this model until traffic behaves and is at the kind of normal bad level of congestion that we all know and expect in that base 2025 scenario. And so when we do that, that's how we get kind of the number of jobs and households that transit can support. So this slide shows employment. And if transit did not exist, we'd need to remove 157,000 jobs to basically return the transportation network to its normally congested state. 76% of these jobs are within a half mile of a metro station, which I think again points to that critical impact of Metro Rail, which makes sense. We've done a lot of transit-oriented development. That's, businesses site near Metro, I think we all know. And then also what we found was that low-income households kind of disproportionately affected in this no transit scenario. They make up about 17% of the labor force, but represent 32% of the job losses. Next slide. So I mentioned that I would get into more detail about indirect and induced employment. And so in our previous study, we basically would have just stopped at the 157,000 jobs lost, but it doesn't address that total impact for employment. The idea that job losses in one area lead to job losses elsewhere. So for this example, indirect impact would refer to jobs that provide goods and services for those 157,000 jobs that are directly impacted within the no transit scenario. So attorneys or accountants or a local office supply store that is providing services to those directly impacted firms might have to reduce their headcounts or just due to the fact that there are fewer businesses for them to provide services to. And then that leads to that induced impact. And that's people who work at either those direct or indirect firms basically no longer have wages to spend on a morning coffee, a work lunch, a trip to the movies. So using established multipliers by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, that basically leads to this total employment impact of 311,000 jobs. And I just want to note too that of that 311,000, nearly 41,000 are actually outside of Northern Virginia, but within the Commonwealth. Next slide, please. Yeah. So for households, it's an equally substantial impact. We lose 128,000 households, or to put it another way, transit supports 128,000 or 13% of the existing households in Northern Virginia. The connection to metro stations isn't quite as tight as it was with employment. About 42% of the households that are lost are within a half mile of transit or within a half mile of a metro station. But again, I think that makes sense when you think about it. Like people often will get off a metro and walk to work, but they might use a park and ride or take a bus from their home to get to a metro station. And so you can see this with the more dispersed household loss across the region. Next slide, please. Another thing that's new compared to our previous study is that with all of this good data we were getting on vehicle miles traveled and new trips, we were able to use some benefit cost analysis methodology to also calculate user and environmental costs for Northern Virginia. So this is more, impactful for us. And really what we found was on the screen here, but there are substantial impacts that happen to workers, residents of the region when you're in your car more often and you're experiencing more time on the road. That just means that you're gonna have to spend more time, you're gonna spend more to operate your vehicle, you're going to have more emissions, there's a greater, you have greater exposure to the potential of crashes on roadways, so it increases serious injuries. And then just the time alone that you spend stuck in traffic is worth something. And so we have the region statistics up here of saving commuters. Transit saves commuters 130 million in vehicle operating costs, avoids 70,000 metric tons of CO2 emissions, avoids over 400 serious injuries. Time spent in traffic, you save $1.7 billion with that. But the thing I want to point out, maybe a plug to read the parts of the report, is that we do break it down by jurisdiction in the report. And so there's interesting things that can be found there. Next slide, please. So finally, why is transit or funding transit important? It's really a vital part of Northern Virginia, but it also provides substantial benefits to the Commonwealth. So that $1.5 billion in annual revenue that transit brings to the Commonwealth is about 5% of Virginia's general fund revenue. So again, funding programs and services for people across Virginia. We also calculated the return on investment based on what Virginia spends on transit in Northern Virginia, and that comes out to about 160% return on investment, or for every $1 spent, they're getting that original dollar back and then have another $1.60 to use however they choose. Also, I think a key thing to keep in mind is that having Northern Virginians on transit removes congestion from our interstates. So it helps improve the reliability of travel for people and for freight. And you look at where we have inland ports in Virginia. There's one out in Front Royal, there's one off 95 kind of in Richmond. Like these, they're depending on the fact that our highways can move. And so I think that's a key thing to keep in mind. And then just finally, it's part of Northern Virginia's ecosystem. That's how we've grown. And Metro Rail has been the backbone of that really for the last half century. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions. And I just want to thank kind of all the staff who are probably in the room have had some role in this study. So it's been a nice one. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, if I could add, having the ability to do a preview with our two committees, our WMATA committee, our legislative committee, really helped hone in on some of the ways we characterize the data. Appreciate their contributions on that.
Excellent. Well, first of all, I just really want to thank and commend you, Anne. Excellent work and everyone who helped on that. I think both looking forward to reading the full report, but the presentation and the impact I'm sitting here and having some new ideas and thoughts. I'm sorry, as we go through, because I do think it is, right, many of us have gone through economic impact studies, and this one really is just looking at a new lens, new area, I think was very creative and innovative. And while we're sitting here, I was thinking, and then you had it on slide 10, I was thinking about the injuries. I was at a community meeting a couple nights ago about Lake Lane and the impacts there, and the impact to lives, injuries, but as well, I'm sitting here thinking the economic impact both to local and state public safety, to emergency response, to if we had all of these extra cars on the road, not only those of us lived here 30 years know that what traffic looked like before this congestion and the time spent in cars, but if you were adding that many more cars, we already know that you're having so many serious injuries and the cost to that, both the physical cost, but also the economic cost. So I don't know how to calculate that, but I'm curious. I'd be curious to see, in addition to all of this, that negative economic impact.
Yeah, and so with those stats in particular, we do take it the next step in the report and give a cost for all of those. So that is there.
Thank you. So I will look at that, and I do think knowing that is critical. And then finally, and I will take some questions. You mentioned the inland ports, right? We all think about of course, because we do have a coast, but knowing, I think especially the way you point out that not only is it bringing economic growth, but being able to have that reliable transportation. I know as we look at some of these express lanes, part of the goal and the hope is to have that more reliable transportation, both for people and for goods to go across. And so I think there's a lot more in the report, and this is really, I think, impactful, and that's not just for our region, but the whole Commonwealth. Yes, let me take questions. Commissioner Bagley, then.
Go ahead. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. So having grown up in Hampton Roads and is why I became a transit advocate, to be quite honest. I truthfully, I grew up, your lives are dictated by having to go through the HRBT or the Monitor Merrimack. And I resolved when I left to go to school that I wanted to be somewhere with mass transit. And so that's how I ended up here. So I really appreciated that number comparison. If we took all, I understand what that number is. And so there are so many numbers in here that are almost so big, they're hard to understand. So I really do appreciate you kind of turning them into that's New York to Chicago, or putting it into percentage metrics. I wanted to follow up a little bit on a point that the chair was making on the injury side, also on the health side. Because one thing that I know is hard to quantify potentially, and I haven't read the whole report, but we're also would see asthma and all sorts of other, side effects of removing transit and putting all those cars back on the road. There's a lot of studies that talk about people living close to highways have higher incidences of all sorts of health problems. So I'm curious, I get that doesn't have a dollar value on its face, but it does in terms of healthcare costs, lost time at work, childhood illnesses. Were you able to quantify that at all?
The emissions released are quantified, but I don't think it necessarily considers all those cascading impacts that happen.
Yeah.
Because you're right. It's even something as simple as I like to say, you know, every transit rider is also a walker.
Mhm.
And so you're getting that physical activity too, often just walking to your bus stop and back in a way that you don't necessarily when you're driving a car. So there's a lot of things, but yeah, they followed, so I'll say, we use consultants from AECOM who are very good at kind of analyzing and number crunching all of these data points. So we're following benefit cost analysis guidelines from USDOT. So kind of using their standards for what to measure, but there's so often kind of things that are harder to quantify.
And no, I mean, it's not a critique at all of the, you know, what the bottom line you were able to draw. I just think it's a valuable sort of, you know, outside point to bring in that we're, you know, we've been talking about social determinants of health and how the role transit plays in that. And I think that's the next layer here is that those people that aren't injured also don't have medical tech. You know, I mean, it just, you can't, the rings that extend out from the impacts of transit are endless essentially. So no, I'm really pleased to see this. I'm looking forward to the jurisdictional level data and, you know, thank you to everyone who put their time into it.
Appreciate that. And it's a good call. I know we were talking executive about Virginia Department of Health and their look and their support for transit and safe access to walking. So I know you had to have a defined study, but I think it's a good point that goes even beyond that. Well, it's not measured here. I do have a couple here and then I see you, Takis. So I will have.
I'll be trying to be quick because I think
Yeah.
I'm sort of anticipating later. Was she putting it?
I got Bagley.
Yeah, but ladies before gentlemen. Anyway, excuse me.
Don't let him go first.
I'll go. Thank you, and thank you for making the big numbers real. That really, I really appreciate that. I found myself realizing, I'm thinking about it, where you, and you had to do it. You pretend that transit like stops at the river. But actually, if this happened, it would cascade over into the district. And I find myself thinking about Metro. I wonder if these kind of studies and stuff have been looked at Metro when we finally to figure out how we're going to fund it. We need probably some federal funding. Because frankly, if we don't have transit in this region, I think the whole region will just sort of collapse. It's going to be, this is just the first cascading. So anyway, I'm just sort of anticipating, and that's not what you're doing, but I assume here in this study, but I assume as we get to our friends in Metro, that maybe that's some of the looks we need to do to really make it clear to the Congress and to the region, to the media, and to the country, what this transit system needs really for everybody. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Excellent.
Sorry, excuse me. Mr. Fox.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Faust. John.
Thank you. First of all, I think it's an excellent analysis. I really appreciate the thought you put into it and
Sorry, let me remind everyone, please speak up because I don't know if they're.
particularly the considering the induced employment this time around, that's really big and makes a big difference. I have to ask, was this all done in-house this thing?
No, we use consultants from AECOM.
Okay. Did they have a template that was used in other areas? Is this, has your approach, is it novel?
So
Is it-
I would say that the initial methodology built upon that which we did in the 2017-2018 report that we first did, where we analyzed the just impact of Metro Rail and VRE. So it was a fairly similar, it was trying to kind of replicate that methodology and then expand upon it based on kind of our consultants' expertise. As far as kind of different points within the process, we were using the regional travel model. So Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, TPV travel model. Then for the economic analysis piece, there are different guidelines and just guidance from both the Bureau of Economic Analysis and then also USDOT for those benefit cost analysis pieces. So where we used it in the report, we kind of called out the specific methodologies that were used. So I think there are some examples of studies of this type. They all have a slightly different flavor, but it's not a completely new methodology, and it's I think one that we felt good about in 2018 and kind of shopped around with a lot of different people to get their opinion on. And so this was really building off that.
I mean, you did a great job. But one factual question, I guess. It says the Commonwealth has 106% return on investment for transit in Northern Virginia. For every dollar spent, it receives the original dollar back plus an additional $1.60 in return. I mean, we're sending, if it's a $1.5 billion net to the Commonwealth, right?
Yeah, the sales tax
Are they
revenue
investing $1
is,
billion?
Hmm?
Is the Commonwealth investing $1 billion in transit?
no. So it's part of it's that calculation, right? So it's 2.5 times or 2.6 times their investment, which leads to the return.
0.6.
Yeah. So that
So 200.
they're basically getting $2.60, but the first dollar is paying for the investment in transit. So the
What's the
$1,
net?
yeah, it's the net profit.
Anyway. Well done.
Thank you. Yes, Takis, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. It's very stimulating or very interesting to read through your report. Thank you so much for describing the impact and also the cascading effects, some of them, the most important ones, I guess. I have a couple of remarks. One is, there is one impact that I don't know if I would just encourage to think about that. It's the loss of value of invested land use that is contingent to the function of transit. So we do a lot of, the investment in land values and in assets has to do with our transit investments. Even a small degradation of transit with all these cascading impacts that you are describing will inescapably affect these values. And this is another layer of impact to our region and to the Commonwealth as a whole. The second thing, and I don't know if this played any role in your analysis, so that's something that I just asked. The second thing is, just this morning, I had a conversation with AAA about what the car ownership for disadvantaged communities means. What does it mean to have to own a car, and how much impacts your ability to finance your housing, etc. So they were telling me that in average in the East Coast is $10,000 to $15,000 the actual cost of ownership and operation of a private vehicle. That means that in several cities, including the metropolitan area to which we belong, you have to earn more than 80% AMI in order to own a car and not being housing burdened. So this is extremely important. And third, I don't know how we can convey to our to the General Assembly and to the Commonwealth, but also to others, that the worst scenario begins when there is a tipping point at some point where the degradation of transit because of this investment begins to cascade and to even and degrade unstoppably. There is sometimes a cynicism that I got many times from in conversation that says, okay, 2, 3, 4%, you have to manage tightly. Well, it's not so easy, because sometimes these 4 or 5% can literally be a tipping point where the degradation of level of service is such that people just begin not to use any more transit, and this has this non-virtuous, vicious cycle that kills transit at the end. So these are the 3 remarks I wanted to make on this.
Thank you, Takis. I think really, really good remarks. And I think part of why we wanted to show this and know, I think your point, cascading effects and compounded effects on that are critical, both here, but also we want, this is so focused on the Commonwealth, right? As we look at the outside investment. I do have Mr. DeFronti and then Mr. Snyder.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a comment that could be for follow-up. It's just, I was struck as well by the Hampton Roads tunnels because of my instinct as to the eventual clear, distinct audience that we have for this report. And so I can imagine the slide deck being super, super important as we use the report. I was thinking in my mind, makes sense to use fiscal 25, but I could envision people saying, oh, well, I'm still in fiscal 24. And that's not a critique. I just really, think that I'd love to hear your thoughts about the next phases, and the 42 pages could be relevant to how successful the use of the report is. So the report seems great. It's just, I feel like there's a whole next phase, and I just wanted to underscore that. I think everybody in the room knows it. I just really wanted to say it because, how you word freight can make me think I'll never get down I-81 so I can support funding for Northern Virginia. Or it can make me think the folks in Northern Virginia are always bigger and think they're fancy, which is not what we want folks to think. So I hope that's an okay sort of thought to share. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder?
Sure. So thanks for the numbers. Thanks for the really creative work. I think I was around when the original was done, and I thought that was pretty groundbreaking. This is really, it builds on it significantly. So and many people have commented how you've taken the numbers and you've made them real to people. I wonder if there's any way to make the 1.5 billion real to the rest of the Commonwealth. Just some ideas, like how many teachers does that represent? How many police officers? How many XYZ? To really drive home the point the way the bridge in Hampton Roads makes the point. So I would just suggest maybe we could do that follow-up work.
How many
part of our
infrastructure project?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
That's a good point. Yeah, Mr. McKay.
Actually, Dave started talking about something I was gonna bring up, which is, the first time we did this, it was pretty revolutionary. I'm not sure we maximized to us the benefit of all that work. And so to me, the most important question is, how do you use this study and tell the story, and who is your target audience?
Right.
And I think it's far broader than just members of the General Assembly. And I think last time we thought about this is our audience mainly being members of the General Assembly. I mean, this has to be business groups, trade organizations, frankly, media in places like Hampton Roads and in Richmond. I'd be talking about, a media outreach campaign, social media campaign. If your target is General Assembly members, the real target is their constituents who will talk to them. I think last time, General Assembly members pretty dug in on their position on this, and a document from a think tank or a consultant from Northern Virginia is not necessarily going to change their mind unless it's done in really plain English. And in a way, like Dave said, this is what it affects your community. This is what your Louisa County, city of Harrisonburg, whatever it is. This is, if we could come up with a portion of that money that then would somehow come out of their community without our contribution and tell a story here that's easy for people to understand. Because I'd hate to see all this work be a great study for us in Northern Virginia and pat ourselves on the back about how great our transit system is and how shiny we are, and have it fall on deaf ears in Richmond, or worse, have it interpreted the wrong way, like that's what we're doing. And so I do think there needs to be a lot of thought given to how you market this, how you communicate it, who is your audience, and how do you reach that audience? And I wouldn't leave the media out in parts of Virginia that we wouldn't normally reach out to. So just some thoughts from what we do next with this so that it's not a wasted effort.
Yeah, I'm looking at Kate, see if,
So
I know
one
you're
of
probably
the-
thinking that way already.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So one of the things that I think as the commission has really grown over the last 5 years is that what we've really grown is our communications team. And so a part of the media release that went out, or is planning to go out, I'm looking around to see, but basically, is it going out tomorrow morning?
Went out this morning.
It went out this morning to media outlets, including all around the Commonwealth. Matt Freeman worked with VTA to identify media markets that are going to work for that. That said, we are very mindful of working with key partners. And one of the things actually, and I know Amy is on the call, we've been talking about one of the key Virginia business groups. We do already plan, I've already been talking a lot to the Northern Virginia chambers and others about this. And so we have that communication going on, but we also recognize a Virginia focused and Hampton Roads focused and I-81 focus is something a part of it. So we are in staff wise positioned much better than we were 5 years ago. But we obviously suggestions, please send them along on how we can do that. I also think social media, that's not necessarily something we thought about, was targeted social media. That's actually relatively inexpensive. We'd have to look how that works within our budget, of course.
Right, sure.
So
And I would say beyond that, I know your team has looked at local regional radio. There's quite a bit across Virginia. So I don't know if that was part of it, but that might be another
we
one.
hadn't identified a specific marketing for this report, like we are doing the marketing camp for Ride. But that's definitely something I can go back and work with the team on. So
Thank you. That's a good point. Yes, yes.
I-
Ron, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry to get back to this, but the transit brings 1.5 billion to the state, right? Okay. But that's not a net thing.
That is
The state is investing in transit today.
correct.
What is the amount of that? It's the net that.
So off the top of my head, don't remember, it's somewhere in the $600 million range, and that's based on draft year 24/6. So it's like.
So the
But
net,
there's also a year of money thing, so we have to, all of our analysis is actually in 2021 dollars, and that's because that was the final year in which the full picture of the amount of like inflation of that dollar. So, you know, the math won't work, we just divide them because it's converting a draft fiscal year 24 figure back into 2021 dollars to then compare to the 1.5 billion.
Is that full amount in the full report? I know we haven't had a chance to see it.
No, we just give the return on investment figure.
I mean, I just think
Maybe we could get that back.
both numbers are relevant right now, what it's sending to the state and what the benefit to the state is. Which is unfortunately not.
Good point. So we can get that information. Any other questions or comments on the reports? Oh, yes.
I'll just second what was being said about targeted social media. It's inexpensive and we can get further across the Commonwealth. And I hear McKay might want to have some ad buys down there too, maybe a billboard. 81A. I'm not trying to be subtle.
All right, well, really appreciate it. It sounds like we have next steps for what we're going to do with this report, but really appreciate that. The report, it is very robust. I've done these in other sectors and this is really truly not 100% novel, I think novel for the way we're doing it, so thank you. So to that, could I have a motion to accept the findings of the Valley of Northern Virginia's transit network to the Commonwealth study? Moved, I heard Mr. Althorn and Mr. Snyder. Is there a second? Commissioner Garvey, any further discussion? All right, let me start the roll call of vote online. Mr. Karantonis?
Yes.
All right, Mr. Walkinshaw?
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau, I believe, is no longer with us. Okay. Then let me go ahead and ask all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Wonderful. Well, that is another unanimous votes. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone on staff who's worked on that and now has additional homework as well. But I think this has been an excellent discussion. I appreciate all the feedback, both here and that the committees gave as well. Normally, next up, we have 6P and 6C, which are General Assembly updates and federal updates. I do believe this has been a quieter month for state and federal activities related to MBTC, not in general. Caveat.
We can keep moving on.
At least they're not negative. So we'll proceed to the next agenda item, which is WMATA. First of all, we're going to get a report from the Virginia WMATA board members. And I believe it's Paul who's here with us today to give the report. Paul, go ahead.
Madam Chair, Matt apologizes. He had an obligation and we had to drop on the phone, so I'll be giving the report myself. But first, we'd like to tell you that the Safety and Operations Committee received an update on the Q3 fiscal year 23 Metro Performance Report. This is something that's new for us now and the way they're presenting out and making all these data points public. Most notably, Metro Rail customer satisfaction hit a rate of 79% in Q3. That's a 10% increase from the prior year. This large increase reflects improved train service and reliability. Headways, or reduced headways, I should say. The new Silver Line Phase 2, which opened in November of 22, has served more than 1.1 million riders in the first 5 months, with Washington Dulles Airport and Ashburn being the most popular stations. Parkland crimes were above target. The parking lot crimes when tripled, with the motor vehicle thefts increasing. On Metrobus, the employee assault rate did not meet target and has been increasing. We also heard and WMATA released a report on the ongoing cyber investigation initiated by the OIG's office regarding allegations of a data breach or leak. The incident originally gave rise to the investigation that took place in January of 23. In that incident, the OIG was alerted by WMATA's cyber security group that it detected abnormal network activity originating in Russia. WMATA's initial findings found that the credentials of a contractor who is no longer working for WMATA had been used to access the sensitive WMATA directory from Russia. The continuing investigation revealed that WMATA failed to follow its own data handling policies and procedures, as well as other policies and procedures establishing minimum levels of protection for handling and transmitting various types of data collected by WMATA. While the investigation is still ongoing, the OIG issued a management assistance report now in order to evaluate the multitude of IT-related critical recommendations, policy violations, and unsound IT practices that continue to plague WMATA. So WMATA did, I want to put a footnote on here. WMATA did immediately contact the FBI, CITSA, the Safety Commission about this. All three have thoroughly reviewed this incident and have issued, no warnings report. We had the dark team come in from Microsoft and did a thorough forensic review of everything. Had some recommendations, but found, no serious issues. So, I just wanted to put, that note on it. We do have a new IT and cyber director start. Greg, did he start? Wednesday or Tuesday or something. Comes to us with a lot of experience. A lot of work has been done by staff in the last 2 years to really organize that department and get it, in a good operating order. So I think we'll be closing quite a bit of that out very soon. Also like to highlight a few things related to service and capital work. The Yellow Line reopened earlier this month following an 8-month rehabilitation project to repair the deteriorating 1970 tunnel and bridge. This is a project that was put off for a number of years. You could literally take your hand and punch through the wall of the tunnel. That's so bad. So the reopening will provide a faster, more direct connection for customers between Virginia and downtown DC, including travel to and from Washington National Airport. And additionally, Potomac Yard Metro Station opened on May 19th, connecting one of Alexandria's fast and growing communities to the region. Less than 15 minutes to the nation's capital. That's right there, Virginia Tech campus. The blue and yellow lines, and is Metro's 98th station. So, and the numbers there, just after 2.5-3 weeks, have been steadily increasing, and we have not seen any takeaway in ridership from Braddock or the airport or Christensen because of it. Metro has now shifted its focus to rail replacement work on the Orange Line, as you all know, and we've been reporting on this now for the last couple of months. During the construction, which will be done in 2 phases, Metro will replace the original 40-year-old steel rail between Ballston and Vienna. From June 3rd to the 25th, stations will be closed from Vienna to East Falls Church. And from June 26th to July 16th, only Vienna and Dunmore will be closed. During the first phase, Silver Line will run in 2 segments from Ashburn to McLean and Ballston to downtown Largo. There will be free local and express buses available, as well as limited stop service between Washington Dulles Airport, McLean, and Roslyn. Metro staff has been working with the jurisdictional partners to coordinate efforts and has been active with customers online through social media, emails, and other things to provide information on the project and the travel alternatives. And I think that is it for us, Madam Chair.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And I know that the good news being the opening of Potomac Yard and reopening of Yellow Line. The bad news for those of us on the Orange and Silver Line is that the closing is coming, but I do want to commend.
It won't be 8.5 months.
It will not be 8.5 months. And I did hop on at my office on the way here today. Was very happy to receive this as I walked into the Metro, and I know all of you should have this. I think just want to commend WMATA for excellent work on this. Excited, especially for the express service lines that will hopefully make it a little bit easier to get to this next month. And hope we'll really see the benefit of Metro when we don't have it available. But really, thank you for the update and for the IT reports. And those of you who know, normally we would have had Randy here this meeting, but he will be with us next meeting. So also able to give reports in person and take some questions.
Madam Chair, as we
yes.
see people start to come back to the office, I'll highlight one station in particular, one in your district, McLean. Since Capital One did bring people back, we're seeing consistently anywhere between 1,700 and 2,000 additional riders at that station.
There's about
Daily.
700 individuals that were attributed to Capital One going back to the office in the middle of the week. So a big bump in ridership.
Excellent. And I'm definitely seeing ridership in both directions, riding on these. We get back on. So very good to hear. Wanted to see that continue.
Yeah, and we are actually having some capacity issues. For this is right now. So
Good.
need more of the 7,000 trains back.
Excellent.
Getting there.
Before I turn, any questions for Paul before I turn it over? Yes, Mr. Snyder.
I do have one. The one negative are the crime statistics.
Yeah.
And I know that at our last meeting, you talked about efforts that Metro is making to try to address that in the system. Do you have the data broken down by jurisdiction? Number one, and number two, you can provide that later. You don't need to do it tonight, but any other comments you care to make about that? Anything else that you're doing?
Yeah, like I mean, Metro is doing everything it can, and we're working with our partners. We're hoping some movement soon, like the District of Columbia, on certain initiatives. Look, things that are happening in society are just bleeding into, Metro, and I think people see it as an easy way to get away, so to speak, or it's their reality and new social norms, since the pandemic don't help much. And so that's why, but we are seeing changes though, David, as ridership comes back. Some of those nuisance type things and everything are definitely decreasing.
All right, well, thank you. Yes, one more, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Alcorn. Yes.
Madam Chair, I'm just curious, you said that you guys were up 79% in terms of satisfaction. Is that not at all? And up over the year before, so you don't see any direct correlation between rider satisfaction and concerns about security?
I mean, I think people are concerned about security and
But
have
other
been,
different
the last couple of years in particular for various reasons. But overall, I mean, the numbers, the satisfaction rate, and a lot of that is contributed to, I think, higher frequency, the trains. As we get more and more of the 7,000 series cars, we're able to reduce those headways. And so I think that has a lot to do with the customer satisfaction. And I think, you know, we initiated the pilot for the $2 weekend flat fare, late night flat fare after 9:30. That has really helped. And I think, you know, once fare simplification and all the other stuff takes place. You know, and, you know, now that we have the yellow line, that helped too.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Paul. Appreciate it. And I will have more next month as well, but I will now turn it over to Mr. Alcorn for the committee report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The one other thing on the Metro, Potomac Metro Yard, or Potomac Yard Metro Station opening, as Senator Warner pointed out, it's 15 minutes to DC.
Yep.
But it's also 15 minutes to the future FBI headquarters location. So it's very well positioned.
Jeff, you would have been proud of the senator. You gave the Maryland back again. Quite a
So the only committee report, we were going to have a June 15th Vermont committee meeting that is canceled. So don't show up then, but we are going to have July 20th at 6 p.m. The next NBTC Vermont committee meeting, and all are welcome. So that's it.
All right, thank you so much. Any further questions or comments? All right, well, thank you so much to our Ramada team and looking forward to having Randy Clark next meeting.
You know,
Yes.
Madam Chair, so Matt, in his capacity as Finance Committee Chair, myself and the General Manager or CFO, we were in New York. We can have to go visiting the various fund houses. So we have a presentation to them, went well. I mean, there were obviously a lot of customers, all the transit agencies making those visits now, or a lot of them are, particularly the larger ones. And so, but I thought the meetings, generally speaking, I thought went pretty well.
And what's the general timeline on that?
I mean, you know, we've got our formal request in, you know, the financial advisors, you know, the team will not make the formal request. In fact, it's probably in by now. I should hear back soon.
Best of luck. Thank you for doing
Yeah.
that. And next on, we will move to action item 8A. And this is looking at some more exciting research by our team, opportunities for bus priority in Northern Virginia. And we have our very own Xavier Harmony and Sophie Spiliopoulos are back this month to give a presentation on their fascinating research that quantifies the cost of congestion to our bus providers. The information here tonight will be shared with the local transit providers to help them prioritize which bus corridors should be considered first to invest in infrastructure such as transit signal priority. And ultimately investing in capital infrastructure can save us a lot of transit operating dollars over the years. And I've heard from our report, helps in many areas beyond just transit. And so Xavier and Sophie, we're excited to hear your findings.
Thank you all.
Sorry, I just noticed your tie.
Yeah, tie.
For those that can't see, it's got buses on it. This is one of my favorite ties. I thought it's quite appropriate considering the topic of the presentation.
A true buzz nerd, we love it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to start with why we were doing this. And I broke it down in a very, I think this is a lot of us in this room can understand why we're doing this, but it's a fairly simple story, I think. Basically, traffic congestion exists, it lengthens trips, decreases reliability, increases costs, and it's particularly big concern in this region. Buses get stuck in that congestion like cars do, but they carry many more people, and therefore we should be trying to help the buses get through traffic faster. So that's really the impetus behind this and the reason why we're doing this work. And hopefully we can help with this issue. So we basically have two different types of analysis here to try and understand where buses slow down and where we can potentially speed them up. So the first type of analysis is what we're calling regional bus trends. So how trip times vary through the day. So when we talk about a trip, we're talking about
a trip a physical bus makes as opposed to a trip someone who is on a bus makes. So when I use trip in this presentation, it's always talking about the bus and how it's moving through the region. Then also looking at how speeds and stop spacing vary across agencies, how speed varies across geographies, and then we're quantifying these speeds and delays by agency, by route, and by location. So how do we do this? So we calculated speed and the cost of congestion using schedule data. So we have a lot of data available to us at METC, but we only use one data type here. It's called GTFS, or General Transit Fee Specification. It's just a quantified way of looking at transit schedules. So on the screen in front of you, can see, or on the slide, if you look at the slides, you can see a screenshot of the WMATA Route 28A bus schedule. And I chose this one partly because it has some, I'm particularly knowledgeable about this route because it's where the Mission 7 project goes, but it also has some really good examples of how trip time varies through the day. So the very first trip of the day takes about 71 minutes, and this is eastbound to King Street, so to Alexandria from Fairfax and Tysons. So the morning, the beginning, it starts at 71 minutes to do that whole trip. And then just a few trips later, it's already taking 81 minutes. So it's the exact same stops, covering the exact same distance, but it's taking different times. And this premise is the basic understanding of how we did this work. We looked at the difference between the minimum trip time for bus stop pairs and the actual time for bus stop pairs to sort of see what the excess travel time is, that difference that is primarily driven by congestion. And that is a time that is so reliable that transit planners who work in each of these transit systems we have in Virginia are able to predict it and account for it in their planning their services. So we see here the schedule, they know this is happening to a level where they can add it to the schedule. I will point out that this analysis that we're going to go through does not include Q because we don't have some of their data, but every other bus provider, including OmniRide, is included in this analysis. And the analysis itself was simple in calculation, simple in method, but robust in calculation. We have about 1 million observations of transit trips in this region that we are working with here. This is just one example. We have aggregated this type of calculation for every bus that happens in Northern Virginia except Q. So how much does this time actually vary? Again, using 28A, Route 28A, because I'm very familiar with it. Trips vary by time, day, and direction. So this is actually looking at Metrobus 28A from Alexandria to Tysons. And this is looking through an average weekday. So that dark green line in the middle of the screen is the medium or the middle trip time for every hour. And then that thicker light green color is the range, how much the trips range during the day. So each hour can have shorter times and longer times. So you can see that changes through the day. But what's I think particularly interesting to point out is that the trip time almost doubles through the day. So it starts at this lowest point at 54 minutes to take that trip. And the longest trip of the day is 106 minutes, which is in the PM peak. And that's the median in the PM peak. It can actually be 106 minutes throughout the day. This is because of congestion primarily. And this is the kind of stuff, again, that is so reliable that transit planners are accounting for this in their schedules. This is something that we're using a very quantitative method, but it's actually based on the experience and knowledge of people who work the transit systems, the transit planners, but also the operators, the people who are driving these buses. They know where stuff slows down, and they'll tell the transit planner, hey, can you add a couple more minutes here? Because I'm always getting stuck here. Can you add this extra time? And that's what we're seeing here. This is the experience, the lived experience of people who work these systems really out here in the data. So Sophie is going to walk through some of the results of the analysis we did, where we extrapolated this throughout the region, and then I will finish up with some conclusions. Sophie.
All right, so I'm going to start with this fun little animation. So what you're looking at right now is the median bus speeds, so the middle bus speeds for all the Northern Virginia agencies. So there are a lot of different values on the screen. The buses are going at different speeds, and these values are affected by the types of service that each agency offers, be it commuter or local or what have you, as well as the land use of the region. So we know that ART serves a different type of environment than, say, Loudoun County Transit. So there are a lot of factors that go into what bus speed is. I'm going to move on to looking at this from a geographic lens. The map on the right that you're seeing shows the average bus speeds on a weekday morning. And what we found was that speeds are slow. Bus speeds are slow across the region. They are especially slow within the Beltway in Arlington, Alexandria. And we also found that bus speeds vary significantly by time of day. So I'm going to move on to this slide, which is going to switch back and forth between the morning rush and the PM rush, the evening rush. And this switch in slides, these two maps will show you the variation in those speeds based on the time of day. So you can see the slowdowns are in red. They're happening in different locations based on whether you're looking at the morning rush, which is there, and then that's the PM rush. And you can see in the morning rush slide that it's more concentrated within the Beltway, while the evening rush is a lot more diffused. And now we're going to talk about the second part of our analysis, which is seeing how these congestion-related bus delays are affecting agency operating costs. So we found that these bus delays total $19 million in cost impacts annually for the entire region. That table that you're seeing shows us that the potential annual cost impact varies across a lot across agencies. But what does that actually mean? That means, like Xavier was saying, transit planners within our different transit agencies account for delays in their schedules differently. So we wanted to drill down to the route level and look at things a little bit more specifically. And you can see that Metro and Fairfax account for the most congestion in their schedules. So you can see this is the top 15. It's the top 10, not 15. No. Yes, it's 10. It's 10. I'm a data person. It's 10. So you can see that Metro and Fairfax account for the most congestion in their schedules. They're the only two agencies presented in this ranking of the top 10 for annual costs. The rankings do shift around a little bit when you look at different factors like route length. So that's that dark green, 2 columns in the middle, and then population density all the way on the right. So I know that there's kind of a lot going on in this table, but I do want to highlight that first row where you can see that Metrobus Route 28A, which you may have heard Xavier talking about before, which also travels along the Envision Route 7 bus rapid transit corridor, consistently ranks as the highest cost route, no matter the method of ranking. So on that note, I'm going to give it back to Xavier to kind of wrap things up.
Thanks, Sophie. So we did a lot of work here and we got a few key takeaways. First, understanding bus speed and congestion can really help us understand where there are opportunities for studying bus priority treatment or how to help route buses faster in the region, and even potentially new BRT corridors. We talked about 28A, how it flows to the top. The one also flowed to the top if you looked at that top 10 ranking, and there could be others hidden there as future BRT corridors. This work also affects funding directly. There are a few different ways it affects us, including like active projects, so we could commit to different funding opportunities. One example of this is that this benefits is that we are basically have an opportunity to use capital funding to help save operating dollars. So by using investment in bus priority infrastructure, for example, we might be able to save operating dollars, which are a little bit harder to come by. And then the regional analysis helps us allow for a holistic understanding of street congestion. And we can see the regional organization, we really see that there are some real regional problems with bus speeds, and a regional approach helps with these. And then finally, this analysis supports related regional work. So Metro is better about network redesign, our regional bus analysis, which I'm also managing, and the MBTA bus rapid transit preliminary deployment plan. The next steps for this are we are wrapping up the draft report right now, should have a draft tomorrow. We're going to do some internal review, MBTC. Then we have our external review with members from each jurisdiction within the MBTC area, what we call the data analysis working group, I like to call the DOG. And then we'll have this ready for public consumption. So we've got a couple levels review to go through this, make sure that everyone's fine with understanding what we're seeing here. And we've got some extra creative ways of presenting this stuff when it goes public that we will share with you all when it's done. So that is where we are right now, and we're happy to take any questions.
Wow, well, first of all, thank you both so much. I know those of us are just sitting here looking through the data right now on the tables and the rankings. And I can tell you, looking at the rankings on 11, not only is BRT 7 at the top, but at the top 4 go through my district, but and I've used many of them. And other than 1A, I do believe, and we had this conversation, I think at our transportation committee meeting, 28A and then Fairfax Connector 401 and 402 are very much north-south, right? 1A is east-west, but I know we've had many of these conversations about when we look at our regional bus network and understanding the needs to be able to get north-south in the region and not just in and out of TC per se and to Metro. But to me, that would be out here that those are 3 of the top 4 fit in that, and we know are critical for our regional transportation network, and a lot of this is jobs between Springfield, Alexandria, Tyson's area as we do that. I don't know the other lines as well, but I'm sure many of you do. And then I guess one question on your takeaways as you're moving forward. So it looks like trying to understand both setting treatment candidates and BRT. I think we understand BRT pretty well. I'm wondering, as we try to understand what we mean by some of this, is it sort of BRT light, or how would you describe some of the other opportunities for priority treatment?
Yeah, so BRT, you could kind of consider an aggregation of bus priority treatments. So bus priority treatments is a very wonky kind of industry term that I always find myself saying because I'm very embedded in the transit research stuff. So I apologize for keep emphasizing that term, but it's basically BRT is a combination of bus priority treatments. So you can have bus priority treatments like transit signal priority, red bus lanes, queue jumps or another type. You can have them in isolation, have them by themselves, spread throughout the system, or you can have them all dedicated to one corridor, and that can really be the backbone of BRT. So Metroway, for example, has the Transitway, which is very heavily full of bus priority infrastructure. When you have it all together, it helps create BRT. So BRT leverages a lot of that stuff, but in a corridor kind of way. You can have individual improvements everywhere, and that's really some of those spot treatments, spot locations that first bullet point really gets at, that you can implement these things anywhere, or you can concentrate them on a route. There's multiple ways to prioritize some of these opportunities.
Can you give us a couple just concrete examples of what some of those individual improvements are?
We actually had what would have been the perfect slide for this, but we got rid of the space.
Oh.
So we actually we actually had a slide that I kind of wish I had as a plan. Yeah, so one of the examples we actually had that we talked about space was actually a few locations where they're really they're short segments, so areas where you can improve things, but there's overlapping routes and transit agencies. So there are opportunities where you can target a specific small segment with just a couple of BRT improvements and benefit not just Metrobus, for example, but also or also Arlington, for example, or multiple routes. And so you can do 2 birds, 1 stone kind of situation where you can see where and we have a few examples of that actually, where multiple routes or multiple agencies are in one location. This is why a location-specific approach might be beneficial for some jurisdictions. Again, some of the results we're doing with this is we're not just sharing the results, like getting their buy-in from jurisdictions, but we're sharing this and we've been talking with the jurisdictions about this so they can see this work and they can take this to the next step and sort of look at, okay, so these are the high priority locations for our jurisdiction. Where can we share resources or share or coordinate on fixing some of these problems, or how can we use this information to take the next step and figure out what type of bus priority infrastructure might be the best suitable thing in this particular location.
Thank you. Super helpful. I know there are probably a lot of questions and excited to see what some of those might be, especially because I think we imagine BRT and the idea that clearly we picked the right route for our BRT, but understanding the costs and how to better invest that as we're doing all of this other regional bus planning. I think this is very exciting. So let me turn it over to Mr. Bagley and then Mr. Aguirre. Yes.
So kind of on that note, thank you, Chair. The King Street example, I was curious, from a physical spacing issue, BRT, that's really, But it strikes me that like King Street, maybe a signal prioritization is one example where if it's a little bit that I understand that is if the bus is the next in the, the light perceives a bus approaching, it stays green longer, it allows it to get through. So is that how, when you're talking about making these recommendations more specific, does the study kind of go to that level and say like, if your infrastructure is X, we propose Y, or prioritizing that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. We don't quite go to that level just because the scope we have here is so broad. So I guess trying to think with the regional lens on, we are doing very, very broad to allow the jurisdictions to go deep. And so we're doing the first cut of like highlighting where the concerned locations, so we can go deeper into what is the most appropriate in each location, recognizing that we need to be context sensitive with everything we do as transportation professionals, and that, we might not be able to solve all the congestion issues because of the other impacts of full bus priority treatments, but doing what we can and recognizing the context of the location we're working in and is really important. So this breadth allows the jurisdiction to go deep, and that's what we're trying to facilitate and help them do.
I appreciate that. And then I just had a practical question.
Yep.
The costs, are we talking about like excess fuel, maintenance increases with, hours in service? Is that essentially the cost increases that you're measuring?
So this cost is what's called like the average operating cost. It's basically using Federal Transit Administration National Transit Database data. And what it is, it's a combination. It basically just gets your operating costs divided by your operating hours. So it's kind of an average of what the cost is. Most of that in a typical transit system is your labor cost. So your operator sitting behind the wheel, but it would incorporate things like fuel and other things like that as well. But most of it's like, you're paying your bus operator to work a certain number of hours, not finish a certain number of trips.
Right.
And so the longer those trips take, the more operators you're going to have to working to help them. So if you can reduce those trip lengths and make them more uniform, you can get more trips done, and that same amount of operator time is like, that's more service you can provide without changing your overall operating cost expenditure.
So these would be costs that would come down essentially. I mean, if you could implement these features, you can't really change the congestion. But if you can implement these features, relatively speaking, these amounts could come down in their respective budgets.
Yeah, I like to consider potential cost savings because there are a whole bunch of other factors at play, but this is what we potentially see looking at these data. Yes.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes.
So what Xavier forgot to mention is that the 28A is also my bus route, and he's trying to show how expensive it is to transport. No, but just to go back to something that the chair brought up, the fact that we are concentrating on the 28A overall route with BRT 7 to try and make improvements. And I look at these because 5 of them either connect or come through Alexandria. I think about the REX and what Fairfax County is doing with the BRT along Route 1, which eventually will connect with Alexandria as well. The 10B goes from Boston down to Huntington Metro, cuts through Alexandria. The new proposal is to actually go down Route 1, so we can take advantage of some of the dedicated lanes that we already have in place for Metroway. And the 29N, right now in Alexandria, we're doing our Duke Street in Motion, where we're talking about potential BRT along the Duke Street corridor, which eventually gets all the way out to George Mason. And so talking with our friends from Fairfax County and from the city of Fairfax, what are we doing to look long range going out in that direction as well? So if we can start putting some infrastructure in place in Alexandria, hopefully we could continue some of that out, just throwing that out there.
Can I just add one of the things?
Van Dorn Street, we got a deal.
Yeah.
So thank you, Madam Chair, just accentuating something that Xavier pointed out is there are opportunities, if the region would like to do it, to be looking at regional grant applications, whether it be Smart Scale or other places. So this is part of the reason we wanted to identify this, just like we are doing all the work and leading on the zero emission bus. There may be some economies of scale for jurisdictions to come together. There may be some good opportunities, especially on the regional side, with Smart Scale for these types of investments. So in some ways, we're planting a seed, but obviously this is information we want to provide to our jurisdictions, and maybe we can find some things that are synergies in that space. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. At some point, I appreciate that. I do see Takis has had his hand up, and then I will come back to Libby. Takis, go ahead.
Thank you. Madam Chair, just a question for so that I can wrap my head around understanding the excellent presentation. So variables like, for example, the design and length of the route, do we have insights about, for example, does the performance suffer above a certain level, a certain length of the route? So let's say, for example, if the route is longer than 35 minutes, then you know the deviation from schedule begins to be critical, etc. Do we have the other classical ones? It's not only congestion; it's front door low boarding, etc. Are these still factors that we factor in, or the number and location of bus stops? Sometimes there are too many, and this makes it even more difficult.
These are all really good questions. And I will say the report covers a lot of this stuff. I was very brief with all of the stuff we covered here. So for example, the bus stop spacing is something that comes up a lot, and why some of these numbers are different in terms of speeds across agencies. I can get quite analytical about that. I'm not going to right now. But it is actually created some really interesting data problems that we dealt with just this past week about what's happening there. We didn't deal with things like all-door bordering or front-door bordering or anything like that because we worked with what was in the schedule. So those kinds of like time savings or differences are accounted for in the schedules already. And then with the actual route length, we didn't look at, we didn't explicitly look at like over an X number of minutes route length, how much is the time changing. We did note there was a correlation between some of the routes that are featured in these top 10 lists are definitely the more regional routes in nature. So there is that inclination, but that's also why we put in the ranking of the cost per mile, because that kind of accounts for that in a respect. We recognize the 28A, for example, is a very long route as opposed to some of the others. So we were wondering, is there a factor between long routes? And so that's why we looked at cost per mile to see if the different things flowed up, and some did. 28A stayed at the top. But we did look at some of those things. Those are good questions, and the report digs into that and more. So I'm sure you look forward to, like everyone will be looking forward to reading it when it's ready for public.
I appreciate it. I wonder, there's so many factors, right? 28A not having other transportation that really goes that route. But before I turn it over, hearing you talk about time and length, someone told me recently in Northern Virginia, we talk about distance and time. I never thought about that really is true. Other people talk about miles, but that would make no sense here when we talk about distance. So yeah, go ahead, Olivia and then John.
First, I want to remind my friends in Alexandria and Fairfax that if you come down Columbia Pike down into National Landing, you get to Amazon and you can circle around to Virginia Tech and the Innovation Center, and it's really good. So don't forget us. Just saying. And then I think this is really cool how you're looking at, you can kind of calculate how, we talk about investing in transit, and you're often talking about time. And I think that's what I had never really sort of thought so much of taking it to the next step about money saving. So I assume that some of this is going to be used to calculate, right, for how cost effective is this? So you invest this, and maybe it's a lot of money, but over 5 or 10 years, you save all of this. Is this how it's usually calculated, or are you breaking new ground?
So this method is actually fairly novel. I thought I was being the original person. I did find out this was actually published just last year, this method. So when I was doing my review, I was like, oh, someone else beat me by a year.
Well, great minds.
Sorry?
Great minds.
Right. So the actual method of doing this is fairly new, but I think that is a good way of looking at this. Once you install something or implement something, you have the schedule data that's, give it some time to adjust and let the schedule pattern settle, and you can see what the impact is. I think that's absolutely a great idea. I know WMATA has a really good data team, and when they implement things, they don't use this kind of data, but they do a similar approach where they look at how effective it is. And so for transit signal priority, which we talked about before, they have a really good idea about where it works and doesn't work, because they have really good data and a really good team where they can study this stuff and see where exactly is it working best. Again, not quite the same data, but the same approach that you're talking about. So absolutely, that's a great opportunity for this kind of stuff. And I'm hoping this kind of method will be implemented by others around the country, because it's actually relatively easy in concepts. And I think, like you said, it's really potentially useful to see the impacts of our investment.
Absolutely. And then as we get more, we start to do some, you'll get more and more data. Really cool.
Thank you. Yes.
Thanks. Good study. It's interesting. Are you looking, this is a general question, I guess, for a lot of studies we do here. Will you be dealing directly with our transportation staffs to share this information and to, you know, encourage them to make changes based on what you've done?
Yeah, so it's a good question you asked. So when we actually developed the methodology, we actually sent it out to all the jurisdictional transportation staff to make sure they had their buy-in. We presented the preliminary results at our management advisory committee MAC meeting last month, I think it was. And then they're going to see the final results as well. We've already had people from OmniRide and Dash explicitly asking for the results because they are excited to see what's going to be, so they can sort of see how they can use it. So we already have had explicit interest from the jurisdictional staff looking to see how they can use this stuff. And we've been involving them through the process. And it seems to be one that's generated some interest. So I'm optimistic that we can provide something. And with some of the new visualization things we're bringing with this, it should be really fun for them to dig in to really look at like what are things happening and how they can improve their own systems. We're definitely creative to really try and help them do their jobs better.
Okay, well, that's great. I mean, obviously, doesn't matter how good a study is if it's not implemented.
Absolutely.
I mean, I would just suggest that, and I can't ask this on my own, but I would hope the commission would agree that for a study like this, maybe in 6 months or 12 months, you come back and say, you know, this is what happened. You know, the county staffs told us, forget it, we're not interested, or, you know, we actually had an impact. You know, all this time and money we're spending on studying and all these things that come up, great studies, you know, had an impact. And that could be something we could look at, you know, 12 months from now, or I won't be. 6 months. Come back.
That's a really good point. If you all want to think about what would be the best way to do that, we know some of it will obviously take some time. So I think continual feedback on what's working and what kind of impact it's having, especially as we're doing all of the big bus regional studies, right? I think it's a critical time. Awesome, good. Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you so much. They really appreciate that. I am excited. I think even just continuing this conversation is pretty critical. And look at that, we are only a few minutes behind schedule. And next up, we are on item number 9. As you know, in 2020, the Commonwealth of Virginia created the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority to promote, sustain, and expand availability of passenger and commuter rail service in the Commonwealth. This includes both the Virginia-funded Amtrak services and investments that support Virginia Railway Express. As the co-owners of VRE, we are quite interested in the efforts and progress of the VPRA and are pleased to have with us tonight VPRA's Executive Director, DJ Stadler. So good to meet you, to give us an update on the Transforming Rail in Virginia program and how we are VRE's co-owners can be best engaged with them. We're also happy to have one of VPRA, there he is, board members representing the MVTC district, former commissioner, Jay Fissette. Really nice to have you here with us today. The board members are appointed by the Commonwealth, and 3 of the VPRA board members must reside inside the MVTC transportation districts. Currently, the board members include Jay Fissette, Sharon Bolova, and Patricia Descher. Mr. Stadler, if you could please give your presentation. If you have other staff you'd like to present as well.
Certainly. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I would be remiss if I didn't point out our board chair, Jennifer DeBrule, who is the director of DRPT. She's joined us tonight as well. And then also Rich Dalton from VRE sits on our board. So I'm surrounded by board members. No question. Also with me tonight is Mike McLaughlin, who's the Chief Operating Officer of VPRA. And the good Lord willing, he won't be interrupting me.
But he's close enough to do it.
Yeah, no, and he's welcome. I'm pleased to be here tonight. If you look at the next slide, and Madam Chair, you talked about a lot of this already, talks about why VPRA is here. Kudos to you for setting the agenda up this way, because Ann's presentation, David and Sophie's presentation really talks about what we are trying to do at the VPRA. We talked about transit earlier. All of the benefits of transit mean that we don't need extra lanes on the highway. But if you ride Route 50, 66, Route 1, 95, 81, 64, you name it, 18 hours a day, you're hard pressed to not be in traffic. So in 2020, we were created by the General Assembly to enhance passenger rail, give the citizens of the Commonwealth more opportunities to take trains where they're going. I live in Fredericksburg. I would have loved to have taken a train up here tonight and not sat in traffic, but there's no train to get me home. So that's what we're here to do, is to add more train service. You see the different powers that we were given by the General Assembly. They were really designed to make it more stable for us to deliver long-term projects that may span different governance terms. Honestly, we're a one-term state here in Virginia. If you look at the next slide, it shows you the map, and we're here in Northern Virginia, so I'm going to focus on Northern Virginia, but we have projects that touch all corners of the state. This slide shows you the service that is in place now. We've got 8 Amtrak routes, round trips. You see in the split between the 4 different routes: Roanoke, Richmond, Newport News, and Norfolk. There are also 5 long distance trains. The North Carolina train goes through, and then you see the VRE service as well. This is really the maximum service that we can run today. Before VPRA was born, we ran on the freight railroads, and the freight railroads control the slots. They do the dispatching. When we go and say, hey, we'd really love a train so DJ can get from a meeting in Northern Virginia back to Fredericksburg at 10 o'clock at night, they say, yeah, we can't do that. We can't do that. So what Virginia did is they purchased the right of way. So we will eventually have the opportunity to control the slots, control the dispatching, and put trains where our citizens want those trains to be. Again, tonight, I'm just going to focus on the Northern Virginia projects. Right now, we are at capacity and we cannot add more trains until we remove the bottlenecks that you'll hear about tonight. The next slide just looks at the ridership. We have experienced much higher ridership than we ever expected, going all the way back to 2009 when we had the first state-supported service going out to Lynchburg. Amtrak and Virginia assumed there'd be about 30,000 riders in the first year. First year, there were almost 100,000 riders. Last year on the Amtrak trains, we had over 1 million riders, and this year the ridership in April alone was about 53% higher than last year. So it proves that if we put the trains where people want them, they are going to ride them. Next slide, if you move forward, we'll talk about the major projects that are, actually before that, we'll talk about the future service expansion. So once we get these projects completed, we have set them up in such a manner that every project that's completed in phase 1, which ends in 2026, unlocks more service. So we complete projects as we move along, more service is added. As you see from this slide on the right-hand side, by 2030, when Long Bridge is done, when the bypass is done, you're going to have basically hourly service adding trains, both to the Amtrak trains and to the VRE. You see we'll end up with about 26 VRE slots. I talked earlier about the bottlenecks. On the next slide, you see very clearly between Union Station and the Occoquan on the left-hand side, what it looks like today. Going from the top, you're at Union Station in DC. The 2 tracks on the right are freight tracks. And on the left, you've got the one track. So if you're coming south, all the northbound traffic there has to stop. If you're coming north, all the southbound traffic has to stop. It's really inefficient. Going down, you see we go across Long Bridge. You only have 2 trucks over Long Bridge, which takes you from DC over the Potomac River into Virginia. Then you've got 3 tracks going to 5 tracks without to West Manassas. If you go to the right, the infrastructure changes that we are in the process of implementing will give you 4 tracks from Union Station all the way down past Alexandria. The eventual vision is you'll have mostly a 4-track corridor all the way down Richmond. That's way out in the future. But the big bottleneck now is going to Alexandria. The 4th track in Alexandria, the Long Bridge, will give you that ability to have 2 freight tracks, 2 passenger tracks. Biggest problem with on-time performance in our country is the fact that it's shared infrastructure. Freight trains go 35 miles an hour. Passenger trains, 79 miles an hour. Obviously, VRE trains after commuter stops, they speed up, slow down, speed up, slow down. Having shared infrastructure makes it very difficult, even on a perfect day, for all of those trains to work well together. Splitting passenger and freight out will vastly improve our on-time performance, and that's what we're looking to do. I talked about Long Bridge. The next slide talks about Long Bridge. It is really the biggest bottleneck we have right now during peak hours, 98% capacity. You just cannot add any more trains.
We talk about it as Long Bridge, but there are really 7 different bridge spans that are laid out there. On the left-hand side, you're going from Virginia north into the district. And it's easy, but I guess I just did. The 2 bridges you see there, number 1 and 2, there's a pedestrian bike bridge, and then the actual 2 new tracks that will go over the river. Those are the easy bridges. I mean, they're going over water. There's some utility work, but those bridges are much less complicated than the DC land going further to the right into DC. 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, they all go over highways that aren't crowded 24 hours a day. And they are in areas where you've got Park Service land, you've got big businesses that don't want to be inconvenienced, you've got the marina there. So that's really going to be the more complex of the 2 phases. We've split it out actually into the south package and the north package. If you go to the next page, you see a little bit about where we are from a progress point of view. We've got 30% design complete. We're working through comments from all the stakeholders, and there are literally 30 plus stakeholders, be it the freight railroads, Commission of Fine Arts, Amtrak, you name it, working through all those comments. And we've started the procurement process already. Next slide gives you a detailed schedule, both for the south package we talked about, which is the bridges over water, to include the bike bridges, and then the right side is the north package. As you see, both of these bridges will be done by 2030. That ends phase 2. That's when all of these new slots will be unlocked. So that's Long Bridge. I gave an hour presentation in about 2 minutes. The next, going north and south, the next project is the Crystal City Amtrak platform. This is the extension really of the VRE Crystal City station that Rich and his team are building. Amtrak is going to be building a high-level platform right next to that so Amtrak service can start. That high-level platform will not be built until after Long Bridge is done, until after the 4th track is done. However, we're working with Amtrak. We want to have them start serving Crystal City sooner. As was mentioned earlier by Commissioner Garvey, there is so much traffic in that area, so much new development that's coming, being in Amazon and others. And we just think that getting service there to supplement the VRE service is just critical. Next project further south is adding that 4th track in Alexandria. This construction will actually start in the first quarter of next calendar year. We'll have shovels in the ground. Will be fully designed by the end of this calendar year. And this is going to make that whole 4-track corridor. We've got 2 freight, 2 passenger. I talked about the 4 tracks. North of Franconia, the stations are on the east side. So the passenger traffic is going to be in the eastern 2 tracks. However, south of Franconia, all of those stations are on the, no, I switched that up. North of Franconia, they're on the west side. South, they're on the east side. So what we have to do, and you'll see it on the next slide, is we have to build a bypass that takes the traffic from one side to the other. When we first started talking with CSX, we contemplated, well, maybe we'll just have crossovers, maybe we'll just have switches. It gets too complicated. Their trains are slow, ours are fast. All those crossovers just wouldn't be efficient. So we decided we'll do a bypass. It'll go up, over, and to the other side, making a seamless transition from the stations that exist now on both sides of that part. And that is 90 minutes of VPRA projects in 5 minutes or less. So I met my requirement, Madam Chair, but I'm happy, of course, to answer your questions.
Goodness. Well, thank you. You truly earned your gold star today. Thank you. Appreciate it. And I see why your CEO, Mr. McLaughlin, really's got his work cut out.
We needed someone here that's also up nights, making sure we can deliver this.
I bet. Well, a lot here. Number one, I want to commend, the General Assembly and everyone who had foresight to say, we really need to have this coordinated authority, really want to move forward on our passenger rail here in Virginia. Someone who loves rail, it's been frustrating what our rail system could be. And I think that even with the short term, but the long term, I think there's a lot of potential. And as we're talking about economic impact, this is huge, right? As we can see even here, all the areas of Virginia that's not reaching yet, right? And where it could reach, and the economic needs in those areas, I think, are just enormous. And so nothing, I think, says more to that than this map. So I really appreciate that. Happy to take some comments. And the only other, had another comment for you is really appreciate the timeline. I think it's really helpful to be able to see that. It is, in that 2030, even up to there, your work plan And then understand where we're going beyond there. Many of us, do not have that direct impact, but understanding as we look at our region and then DC and the Long Ridge and the impact. So I just really want to thank all of you. I think this really brings it to mind, especially those of us who don't live this every day. I very much appreciate the presentation.
If I may, I'd add, it's only possible because of the partners around this table. I mean, the folks we've worked with, the VRE folks, they've just been great. I think everybody, whether you're on one side of the aisle or the other, appreciates the fact that our congestion on the highways is not sustainable, and our ability to get more folks on the train is just positive environment, positive quality of life, and it's really been a good partnership with everybody.
Absolutely. And thank you for leading those efforts of the pioneer there. Yes, Mr. DeFerranti.
Just I appreciate you mentioning the partnership. You highlighted the North package. I hope you will keep thinking of how we can be helpful through the appropriate channels to keep the North package en route to 2030 as well. I'm sure you think about that a lot. There's bigger, but certainly COG and other venues, however we can help. Don't forget to add and us to engage.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Certainly will.
Yes, Mr. Aguirre.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Echoing some of your comments, huge fan. I was there a few years ago, Crystal City, when then Governor Northam was giving the presentation and the investment that we were making. And personally, I have very fond memories riding the train to visit my grandparents. It was just a great way to be able to travel. I still try and do it today, going down to Richmond. And so you said hourly service, will be hourly service eventually to Richmond?
That is the plan, yes.
Okay, and then somewhat selfishly, I noticed the Virginia VRPA, our neighbors south of us in North Carolina, are they making some similar investments to try and connect up with us? I don't know if you have any insight on that.
No, that I should have paid you to ask that question, because we were actually partnering together. So south of Richmond, we purchased the S line, which is a shorter route from Richmond to Raleigh. It takes about an hour and 15 minutes off of the trip time. We have partnered with them already to do some of the preliminary design work there. They have made investments south of the border to get to Raleigh. So yes, we're looking at it not just from a Virginia point of view, and we've worked with Maryland as well, because at the end of the day, we all have to move together. Both North Carolina and Maryland are strong partners.
Wonderful to hear.
Excellent. Libby and then Sarah.
Thank you for the shout out to the growth in Arlington, because we do need it. And I took the train recently down to Roanoke. It was fantastic. I also had the opportunity recently to ride high-speed trains in Europe, which is a whole different thing. Are these going to be high-speed trains? And when you say you're taking over tracks, and are you laying new tracks down? So they're going to be new tracks, and I see head nods. So it'll sort of be high-speed eventually from here, like down to Charlotte.
So I just want to temper expectations. I don't know which trains you rode in Europe, but those are very high-speed trains.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting quite that, but higher speed than what we've got now. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. In fact, part of, and there'll be places where they're slower too, but we look to get as close to 79 as possible. The only way this works is if you're competitive with the trip time. And curvature, you're going to have places where you've got to slow down, but we will be laying new track. There are places where we're adding new track to Long Bridge. There are 2 brand new tracks that we have passenger, new tracks in Alexandria. Between here and Richmond, we've got a number of sidings that we'll be adding and additional tracks like between Franklin and Lorton. So yes, there are places where we're adding new tracks.
Last quick question, and they won't be bothered by the heat too much, because I've been on trains where we have to like slow down or even stop in the middle of a hot spell because the tracks can't take.
So we get heat orders or slow orders when it's hot. What happens is in the old days, it wasn't even continuously welded rail. It was welded here. And every time it got hot, you had constriction and the rail would become pliable. And then if you're going fast over that rail, it becomes a safety risk. When you have newer rail, you have less risk, but still, if you've got a big span in temperature, from the low of the day to the high of the day, you're at risk of having those heat kinks, or if you've got a real high temperature. So you'll never get away from having heat slow orders. But 2 ways you can handle that. Number 1 is just make sure that the track continues to be very well maintained. And number 2, add expectations in the schedule. If you know that 17 days out of a month of August, for example, you're going to have heat orders, then for that temporary period, you have the option. You can make the schedule a little longer so passengers are aware of, hey, this is what they're going to expect.
Thank you. And that's a good point, because I remember I was in college when our exchange student from France was looking at high-speed rail that unfortunately did not go anywhere, but the opportunities that we have to be able to have higher speed and have it be more effective and efficient. Yes, Ms. Bagley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just want to give my own quick example of the value of rail. I was able to have lunch with my mother on Mother's Day in Williamsburg because I took the train to Williamsburg, had lunch, took the train back home, all in a day. My parents live in Hampton Roads, like I mentioned earlier, and there was no way I was driving down, to do that. So, and everything went really smoothly. So I'm a huge fan and proponent. On the flip side, I was supposed to take a train on Monday from St. Louis to Chicago. It was 5 hours delayed, so I ended up buying a plane ticket. And so what I'd like to ask about is, this is actually like a national problem. This isn't Virginia's rail problem. This is a national sort of freight and passenger conflict problem. So I'm curious, is VPRA working in concert or getting best practice lessons from, are there other states that are undertaking similar efforts like this to buy track and improve the passenger service?
So I was going to say yes until those last 7 days. There are some states that own their own infrastructure, but not a lot. There are, however, there is a big movement over the last decade or so of the states getting together to work with Amtrak. It's the State Amtrak Intercity Passenger Rail Committee, and they're actually meeting, they met today, to work together to make the performance that much better. Focusing just on Virginia, part of the agreements that we made with CSX on this corridor were to have regular performance meetings. So we get together with CSX, with FIRE, with Amtrak, and we look at every single delay and say, okay, train 85 had a problem on whatever date it was. What happened? No blame, but what do we do to make sure that doesn't happen again? And those performance committees are still in their nascent stages, but we have been really pleased with the openness of the freight railroad of Amtrak in saying, yes, we probably made a mistake here dispatching and we won't do that again. It will get much better, and your trip was likely hindered by freight traffic. Once we have the separation of freight and passengers, a whole new game.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm pleased to hear, I guess, that we're leading the way a little bit, it sounds like, in terms of.
Yeah, with great power comes great responsibility. We are really ahead of other states, which other states are looking at us as a model.
Oh, great.
That's what we'd like to hear. Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments? All right, well, really, again, I want to thank you, Mr. Tadler, and thank our staff because they had the foresight of creating this agenda that you will now be followed by VRE. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right, we have 3 VRE action items tonight, but first we will hear from Mr. Dalton to give his VRE report, which will be followed, I believe Mr. Alcorn tonight, in place of Mr. Walkinshaw, will be presenting the action items. All right, Rich, it's all yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, commission members, happy Friday Eve to everybody. I'll see if I can't follow DJ's impeccable on-time performance as it relates to his presentation. But with that, just wanted, you do have the CEO report in your package. I'll just highlight from a overall system performance and ridership standpoint, pretty much on par for the month of May. This is unaudited simply because the month just ended yesterday. And again, somewhat on par with April and May. We did have a major service disruption a week ago Monday that caused us to cancel several trains, not only on Monday, but some on Tuesday that dropped our ridership down. But system performance, right about 85%, still below our target of 90%, and average daily ridership still in that mid 6,000 average daily riders a day. I do just a couple of things before we get to the action items. Just wanted to promote Saturday, June 3rd will be once again providing special train service for the Manassas Rail Festival. And so if you find your way out that way, and great event overall in the city of Manassas, but we will be operating some special service out there for the day. It's the 29th year of this event. So once again, proud to be part of that. And also, I just wanted to give a shout out to Director DeBrule, who took time out of her very, very busy day yesterday to be able to frankly spend the day with BRE staff in what we've affectionately referred to as our system tour. Several of you in here have been part of that. And again, want to thank her for her time, but also want to just, if anybody is interested in taking that tour, you can reach out directly to me and we'll get that scheduled for you. So with that, Madam Chair, that's my concise report.
Excellent. DJ really set a good example on that. Let me first reach out and see if there are any questions or comments on the reports. My only question is I'm noticing that the summonses issues went up. Is that related to the incidents?
I'm sorry.
The summonses in April were related to the incident or no?
The fair summons, not
No,
directly
not
related, no. It's actually, you know, frankly, that's a very minimal issue for us. And so it really sort of spikes on us now and again. So, but yeah, it did pop up a little bit in April.
But not related. to the
Not-
incident. Okay. Yes, Mr. Faust and Mr. Snyder.
It just, question popped into my head. Are you seeing a uptick in crime on VRE? Where we are?
No,
Good.
no,
I mean, I hadn't heard anything.
no, it's, no uptick, nothing out of the norm. Not at all.
Mr. Snyder.
What is your average daily ridership today compared to 2019?
So we're at, we're through the end of May, we're still, like I said, unaudited, we're still about 6,500 average daily ridership, right at the beginning of 2019, 18,500. So we're still 30%, 35% of that ridership.
Any ideas about how to bump that up other than hoping that people come back to their offices?
We got one coming out, but yeah. So, you know, we continue to gradually see ridership come back. I'll give you a comparison through say January through May of 2022, compare that to January through May of 2023. Our ridership is up 80% year over year, right? So it is gradually coming back. We see these spikes, particularly the last couple of months. We have some heavy days, some lighter days. It just seems to level out. We do anticipate, of course, as other providers anticipate an uptick in ridership. But I will say one thing that we are closely looking at is the change in ridership patterns, the change in demand patterns. And we will be, you know, in the near term, if you will, we'll need to look at that and see if there's an opportunity to, you know, to better position our service to what that demand is. We'll say DJ did a great job in saying, you know, in terms of just going out and adding more frequency or more trains or whatever, the capacity is very constrained right now. So we need to be thinking in the near term, I say within the next year or two, or the next, you know, 2 to 5 years of just being creative, if you will, with the amount of service that we can, given the capacity that's out there, until some of these planned capacity improvements, once again, that DJ referenced, are actually finished, and those additional train slots are made available to us. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Rich, but we'll keep you up here. I do believe we have 3 action items plus 1 information item. And we still have a couple of more items after that. So just letting my commissioners know, there's 9/16, and we're trying to be as quick as we can with the action items. Mr. Alcorn, thank you for reading these.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. As Mr. Walkinshaw is remote, I'm going to move through these very quickly on his behalf. First of all, 10B action item resolution number 2501 will authorize the VRE CEO to execute an amendment to the contract for maintenance services for commuter rail with Keolis Rail Services, Virginia LLC by approving up to $11,825,500 for the third year of the first option period for a total contract value not to exceed $70,751,779 through June 30, 2024. This action will authorize the continuation of contracted services for the maintenance, inspection, and repair of VRE locomotives, passenger rail cars, and maintenance facilities for FY 2024, which is very important for running on rail service.
Absolutely. Any questions from commissioners on that? Move it. Oh, yes, I have a motion from Ms. Bagley, second, multiply seconded. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none, let me start with online. Mr. Carantonis,
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw,
Aye.
and Mr. Brule.
Aye.
Excellent, thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Excellent, that passes. Now we are on to 10B.
Okay, actually 10C, I think.
Oh, sorry.
In the agenda, yeah.
Yes.
It's changed. Resolution number 2502 will authorize the VRE CEO to execute an amendment to the contract for operating services for commuter rail with Keolis Rail Services, Virginia LLC by approving up to $19,129,000 for the fourth year of the second option period for a total contract value not to exceed $249,717,057 through June 30, 2024. This contract will continue services for management, supervision, and certified locomotive engineers and conductors to operate VRE commuter rail trains for FY 2024.
And do I have any questions? So I have a motion moved by Ms. Bagley, a second. Sorry, not Ms. Bagley, Ms. Garvey. Second.
I'm just channeling.
That's right. You are all the great women in the room.
Yeah.
Multiply seconded. Let me start with roll call. Takis.
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw,
Aye.
Mr. Brule.
Aye.
All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? Excellent. Another unanimous vote. Mr. Alcorn.
So for 10D, last resolution number 2503 will authorize the VRE CEO to execute a letter agreement to extend the current term of the operating access agreement with Norfolk Southern Railway Company for 1 year to expire on June 30, 2024. The term of the current operating access agreement with Norfolk Southern Railway Company will expire on June 30, 2023 in 29 days. VRE and Norfolk Southern staff have been in discussions on terms for a new agreement, and both parties agree more time is needed. All other existing terms and conditions will remain the same through the extension period ending June 30, 2024.
Excellent. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
By Ms. Garvey, a second. Ms. Bagley, let's do an online roll call. Takis,
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw,
Aye.
Mr. Brule.
Aye.
Excellent. A formal, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that motion passes. Thank you. And then finally, just an information item, but a very exciting one. Mr. Alcorn, go ahead.
Thank you. 10E, FYI, VRE Fare Free Friday at its May 19th meeting. The VRE Operations Board authorized fare free travel on Fridays for all VRE riders starting on June 2nd through September 1st, 2023. This fare free initiative is intended to promote VRE service and attract new riders, as Mr. Snyder asked about earlier. This summer months, particularly Fridays, are traditionally low ridership days for VRE service. FYI.
Very exciting. Well, I'm looking forward to it, getting out and about on the train. So I love that idea and we look forward to seeing how that goes and getting some new riders. All right, to that, I want to thank you and your staff, Mr. Dalton. You are now dismissed.
Thank you. Sure.
And I assume there are no final questions on VRE. So we will move on to the RPT. Jennifer DeBrule, the director, if you'd like to give us your report.
Good evening. In the spirit of DJ and Rich, I will also be very, very brief and try to keep us on time. You have my report in your packet. I will highlight a couple of things for you. Our final 6-year program will go to the Commonwealth Transportation Board this month for approval. $6.5 billion over 6 years, the largest program in the history of the agency. So that is transit and rail, but something that certainly we are proud of the investments that we're able to make in multimodal transportation. Along that lines, we are very, very excited. I personally am very excited. We're going to have a new CFO joining us just in a few days. We have been without a CFO for a year, so that would be my 3rd job that I've held over the past year, in addition to being the DRPT director and the VPRA board chair. So very happy to have Deanna Owari joining us from the state of Indiana, where she was the deputy state budget director and the CFO for their workforce development agency. Comes with incredible credentials. And so you will have an opportunity to meet with her going forward. With a program that big, we need really strong financial staff. And so we're very fortunate to have her coming on board. Last thing that I will mention, DJ leaves the bad news to me because I'm the board chair and he gets to talk about building things, which is what I really like to do. We did take the fiscal year 24 budget to the VPRA board for approval last week. It does show a funding gap in our program of projects. So for folks in the region that might want to help us out with some things, we are in the process and we have a number of applications pending with the Federal Railroad Administration, working with the Federal Transit Administration and others. So to the extent that the region would like to help advocate for funding to help fund the gap of funding that we need to complete both the Long Bridge and the Franconia-Springfield or the Franconia bypass, DJ and Mike and I can help point you in the right direction. I am very confident that that gap will get filled, but it would be helpful to have voices other than ours advocating for that. So with that, I will conclude my report. Happy to answer any questions. I will also say, Rich gave me the best day ever yesterday, out getting to ride trains all day. So I strongly encourage all of you to take him up on his offer. That was 4 years in the making. We started talking about that many years ago, and we finally found the time yesterday, and it was worth every minute of it. So thank you, Rich and VRE.
I love it. I love that idea, and the little ones, maybe a family day, we can plan and take them along, get some early riders for the long term. So thank you so much, Jennifer. Excellent work. Any questions or comments for Mr. Poole? Awesome.
I'm fine with the leadership talking about doing that letter. You know, I think Mr. Gould invited us to possibly do a letter of support. I'm fine. Cheers to do that if they'd like.
Let's go back further. I think probably get some more details and
Yeah.
deadlines and things. Excellent. Thank you. So it's up to you, Kate. Take it home.
So obviously there's fantastic news in here of all the great things that have been going on in the last month, but I do not want to slow down because I have some sort of fun staff announcements.
You do.
So we're just gonna have to hold on for a second. First of all, I'd like to introduce Noman Saeed. I want to do a little wave out. He's just joined MVTC as a financial analyst. This is a position that we are so happy to fill, working with Scott and Clethia on a number of things, diving into our regional gas tax revenues, doing financial accounting functions, and we picked him up from Morgan Stanley. And so we're excited to have him on board. So thank you. Thank you. We also, you know, it's sort of summer student season. And so we do have a new transit fellow, Rachel Inman. Rachel, you want to give a wave? Rachel's a recent graduate from Virginia Tech with a bachelor's degree in public and urban affairs, majoring in smart and sustainable cities with a minor in landscape architecture. And so she's going to be working on a number of initiatives with folks like Xavier and Sophie that we had here before. And so she's going to be diving into a bunch of stuff related to bus stops actually for us. And in particular for Rachel's position, I want to thank again DRPT for their support for our Transit Fellow program. That's making it possible for us to bring her on board. And then I do want to announce a certain familiar name. Ben Mattice is joining us as a part-time assistant to our communications team, providing a great deal of support to graphics, a lot of our social media and other things, some of the things perhaps you've seen this evening. And he is a student athlete at Temple University, doing a bachelor's in advertising art design. And so he's just here for the summer helping us out. So those are the staff announcements. And then finally, just a reminder, we do have a number of committee meetings coming up. The WMATA committee on July 20th, so we have a little bit of break till July 20th. The program advisory committee will be meeting on July 26th. We do plan in sort of late August, by more early September, a legislative and policy committee meeting that may join forces with the WMATA committee. But going backwards, we do need to remember that our next commission meeting is July 6th, where we're going to have WMATA General Manager Randy Clark joining us. And we're also going to have some updates on what's been happening with our fare-free and reduced fare transit products around the region. And so that's my report for this evening. And it's not quite 9:30.
Look at that. Excellent. All right, well, I will try to wrap it. Oh,
I just realized,
Yeah,
marketing campaign.
marketing,
This
I was
is
gonna
what happens
say.
when it goes to the very, very end, but we have a show and tell. Very quick show and tell. Our marketing campaign launched today. And this is called Ride With Us. It's supporting the reopening of the Yellow Line Bridge Tunnel and the opening of the Potomac Yard, Virginia Tech Station. And so just a little overview, and I think we're going to just do a little scrolling. This is our website, which is the novarides.org. It's in Spanish and English. It's obviously showing you the English version. And this is where folks can go in and basically find out information from origin, destination, and all the transit options. Just for fun, a little bit earlier today, I wanted to see, how I could get home, and it even included if I want to grab bike share. So I thought that was kind of cool. So we're very happy. This is very geo-targeted right now with the yellow and blue line, but it's going to go more regionally once the orange line opens up later this summer. Thank you again to DRPT and our local partners for funding it and for the team in putting this all together. So you'll probably see a little bit more on stats as we move through the campaign. So did I miss anything? We're done. Okay. Thanks.
awesome. Thank you. Very exciting. And I love that it is including the rideshare. I took my first scooter today. I prefer the bikes. I think it's my last. It was sitting in front of my office. Very excited to see that. Any final questions or comments from commissioners? A report? Oh, yes, Dave.
Yeah, just one quick question. Are we gonna follow up Jen DeBrule's request for assistance? Has that already been asked? I didn't hear it.
Yes, so I need to find out from the PRA and from Gender Bowl what the ask is and the timeline for it, and then I will get back to you with that information.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, excellent. Well, this concludes our meeting right at 9:29 p.m.